Sun over Cape Canaveral shines down on America's new space shuttle. Inside, Discovery sits 6 people set to fly into space. Among them, America's second woman in space, Judy Resnick, and a man working for a private corporation, Charles Walker, set to work on a space pharmacy lab. A few minutes ago, as the hatch was closed on the side of the shuttle, the crew chatted with Houston to check out its radio.
Discovery, Houston, how do you read SIMO? I'm clear.
Discovery's crew talking to Houston, perhaps their only conversation with Mission Control before launch. The liftoff is being handled by the crew at the Kennedy Space Center, of course. The crew carefully monitoring a checkout for leaks in the crew's cabin. Discovery, a checkout going just fine right now. Clouds are in the forecast for launch, but the latest weather report issued just a couple of minutes ago indicates the cloud cover will be so high that it will have no effect on the launch. The liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery set for 7:43 this morning, Houston time. Our live coverage begins at 7:40 a.m. right here on KTRH. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
The new shuttle Discovery is counting down for its maiden flight with 6 astronauts. Jesse Jackson's heading for San Salvador and Havana. Good morning, this is Reed Collins with the CBS World News Roundup. A third-generation space shuttle is preparing for launch this morning from the Kennedy Space Center, and correspondent Christopher Glenn reports.
43 minutes to go, and nothing apparently standing in the way of an on-time launch of the newest space shuttle, Discovery. 6 crew members in place in the spacecraft, lying on their backs, waiting. The commander is Henry Hartsfield, a veteran of Shuttle Flight 4, pilot Michael Coates. 3 mission specialists, Judy Resnick, the second American woman in space, Steve Hawley, husband of the first woman, Sally Ride, and Richard Mullane. And there is, for the first time, a spaceman from private industry, Charles Walker, who will be working on an experiment leading to the zero-gravity manufacture of a secret new drug he says will benefit millions of people. With so many people aboard, space inside the shuttle is at a premium.
Judy Resnick and Mike Mullane flipped a coin to see who would have to sit on the downstairs on the mid-deck. That, of course, doesn't have any windows, so the view is not nearly as spectacular. Apparently, Judy Resnick lost.
So Mission Control says she'll have no view on launching, but will get the window seat coming down for landing. Right now, all systems are go. The weather is beautiful. The familiar countdown sequence ticking off toward an on-time launch less than an hour away. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
And the time now is 2 minutes after the hour.
Space Center. The problem lies in one of Discovery's backup computers. Apparently, it just stopped right in the middle of its program, refusing to kick into the configuration needed for the final phases of the countdown. And the words of Hugh Harris at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida indicate that Discovery may not get off the ground at all this morning.
We are continuing to look at this problem with the backup flight system computer. We have not been able to resolve it as yet, and do not have confidence that we will be able to come out of that planned 10-minute hold and proceed with the launch this morning.
Now, they're not sure whether this is a problem with the computer itself or with the software with which the computer is programmed. Luckily, this morning, they have a long launch window. In other words, they have a 43-minute time frame for launch. They could go up to 43 minutes after the launch if they need to take off. And that's giving NASA less than an hour to work out the problem if Challenger is to take off on time, at least today. Right now, the countdown is on hold at T-minus 9 minutes. That is a built-in hold that was supposed to end roughly a minute from now. But NASA's decided it will not end that hold. The hold will continue until they figure out what the problem is with Discovery. There's a strong indication that Discovery may not get off the ground at all this morning. We'll keep you posted as the morning progresses. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Now willing to come to the country's capital at any time.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Christopher Glenn at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. At this time, a few minutes from now, the Space Shuttle Discovery, the newest in the fleet, the third orbiter, was supposed to be launched into a 7-day mission in orbit. It is not going to go today, however, because of a computer problem. Practically at the last minute, the final stages of the countdown, a backup computer would not come online when it was called for, and the engineers and the technicians here at the Cape wrestled with the problem through a built-in hold hold period during the countdown, but they could not get that problem licked. And if there is no backup computer, there will be no flight. The crew will be coming off of the spacecraft now, very disappointed, no doubt, and they will be waiting at least a day and possibly two before they can try again. This is how Mission Control made the announcement.
Seek expressed his regrets to Commander Henry Hartsfield. Was sorry that they couldn't get off today. Appreciated his patience, but that he felt that it was better that we get a handle on this problem and launch with a first-class machine, to which Hank Hartsfield responded that he concurred. A long discussion between the launch team here, primarily with Charlie Floyd, describing the problem, which was when they actually tried to bring the backup flight system, the single general-purpose computer, from a standby to a run mode, that it detected an internal problem, indicating a possible internal hardware failure. And at that point, when they tried to transition to an Ops 101 configuration, the terminal countdown configuration, the computer hung up at that point.
Mission Control describing the problem that has postponed the flight of the shuttle Discovery this morning, at least for one day and possibly two. Major disappointment for the crew, Henry Hartsfield and Michael Coates, Judy Resnick, Steve Hawley, Mike Mullane, and Charles Walker. They've been aboard since early this morning, waiting for their ride that they have spent so much time, so many months preparing for, and only to be pulled off at the last possible moment by a malfunctioning computer. Again, the flight of Discovery postponed at least for one day and possibly two at this point. I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
CBS News, this is Jackie Judd. A disappointment this morning at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The first launch of the Space Shuttle Discovery has been delayed.
This is Christopher Glenn at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Launch Director Bob Seek has made the decision. We will scrub for the day. We do not feel confident in proceeding with the launch this morning.
It was just one of those things, no problem standing in the way of an on-time launch for the new Space Shuttle Discovery. Just a few minutes left in a flawless countdown when out of a clear blue and Florida sunny sky, a computer would not come online when it was supposed to. They had a built-in 10-minute hold period during the countdown to try to figure it out, but couldn't, so the order to scrub was issued. They could try again tomorrow, or they could wait for 2 days to try again. That decision has yet to be made. It's the first time a launch has had to be scrubbed since the first flight of the first shuttle, Columbia, was delayed 48 hours in 1981. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
CBS News, this is Mitchell Krause. On a scheduled launch time, space agency officials scrubbed today's maiden flight of the Space Shuttle Discovery. Trouble with the backup computer control system caused the delay until at least tomorrow. But then, says Captain Art Thomas, the shuttle weather officer, Mother Nature could be a factor.
If we do get the front to move through a little bit faster than we anticipate, there is some clear and dry air behind it, and we would be considerably better than that condition. However, at this time, it's too early to call that, and we would have to be a little bit pessimistic for tomorrow due to the RTLS conditions.
Problem, partly cloudy and 90 degrees. Stay tuned for more Bruce Williams following CBS News.
CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney. Huddling right now to decide whether all the hardware is ready for tomorrow's second attempt to launch the new space shuttle. A faulty computer blocked plans to start Discovery's maiden voyage this morning. Liftoff is tentatively set now for 8:43 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, but even if all the systems are go, NASA says the weather may not cooperate. It's been cloudy with showers at the Cape.
Mutual News via satellite. I'm Mike McCluskey. The U.S. will try again Tuesday morning, maybe. Mutual correspondent Jim Slade has more from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
NASA management people here had a long meeting which started at about 9 o'clock Eastern Time and lasted for more than an hour, in which they went over all the contingencies before them. They decided to go ahead and start the count on time with an eye cocked toward rain showers that have been plaguing the area all evening long. If the rain doesn't clear out by the time they get to the point where they have to pour the super cold fuels aboard the main belly tank at 1 a.m. Eastern Time, then they'll be forced to declare a hold until Wednesday morning.
There is a 60% chance for rain at launch time Tuesday.
CBS News, this is Reed Collins. The hope is the second time's the charm at the Cape this morning as the countdown continues toward a second attempt to launch the shuttle Discovery on the heels of yesterday's computer failure. Latest from the Kennedy Space Center now, and Christopher Glenn.
The 6 shuttle astronauts must have a slight sense of deja vu this morning, and they're right. They have been here before. The early wake-up, the hearty breakfast, the weather and other briefings, the trip out to the launch pad. They're just about there right now and should be settling into their seats inside Discovery within a half hour. Barring the last-minute snafu like yesterday's computer failure, the weather is now the chief concern. Low clouds and haze have the forecasters waiting for the sun.
The thing that we'll have to wait and see is how the sun affects these lower cloud conditions when it comes up, and how effective it is at burning off some of the lower cloud layers and haze.
It's no problem to launch through such clouds, but should there be some emergency in the first minutes of the flight, they could interfere with attempts to turn around and land back here in Florida. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
The go-ahead to shut Discovery's hatch just a few minutes ago.
You want to go for hatch closing?
Roger, we'll put that one.
The crew now closed up inside. The new space shuttle is pressing on like a rerun of yesterday. Technicians have checked out the computer borrowed from the old shuttle Challenger, now ready to fly in Discovery. They're confident it will work this morning aboard the new shuttle. But NASA cannot be so confident about the weather. A very heavy blanket of stubborn fog still clings to the ground at Cape Canaveral. Chief Astronaut John Young has just taken off to check out the weather from the air, flying not in his usual T-38 trainer, but in a specially modified Gulfstream jet that presumably will be easier to fly through the thick fog. NASA's ground rules say that Discovery needs at least 7 miles of visibility at launch time, just in case the shuttle has to turn around for an emergency landing at the Cape. They're hoping the sun will burn off some of the fog in time for a launch an hour and 4 minutes from now. The liftoff set for 7:43 this morning will be carried live here on KTRH. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Preparations continue for another try at launching the new Space Shuttle Discovery. Hart and Mondale plan a meeting today in Manhattan. Good morning, this is Reed Collins with the CBS World News Roundup. A foggy morning at the Cape, but preparations continue toward a second attempt at launching the new Space Shuttle Discovery. Christopher Glenn reports from the Kennedy Space Center.
Astronauts Hartsfield, Coates, Resnick, Hawley, Mullane, and Walker are ready, buckled up inside Discovery, waiting once again for launch, scheduled less than an hour from now. So far in today's countdown, no snafus like the gremlin in a computer that caused a scrub yesterday. But as they look out the spacecraft windows, what they see right now is fog, lots of it. That could cause problems if something goes wrong right after launch and they have to come back to the Cape for an emergency landing. A weather officer says it's up to the sun.
With the activity we have right now, easily within the next hour, it could begin to burn off. It could blow out of the area. It could be completely clear at launch time.
If they should have to scrub because of the weather, would the crew be discouraged? Shuttle 7 astronaut Norm Taggart.
I don't think that they're discouraged. I think that they're disappointed for that day, but not discouraged in the sense of any long-term effects. I think that they come out of there thinking, boy, I really wish I could have done it today, but I'll sure be ready to go do it again tomorrow.
Well, it wouldn't be tomorrow for Discovery's crew. After 2 days of trying, everybody would need some rest, and the next launch attempt would be made Thursday, not tomorrow, if they have to scrub today. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center, Florida. This is a CBS News special report, The Flight of Discovery. I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Well, just about 3 minutes from now, the flight of Discovery should finally be underway. It was scrubbed yesterday when the original launch date was planned because of a glitch, a malfunction in a computer, the backup computer of the 6 that are on board the spacecraft. They had to take that bad unit out, borrow a perfect unit from the sister shuttle ship Discovery, and and put that one into, or Challenger rather, and put that one into the Discovery, and the computer is now working fine. This morning, when we arrived at the Cape and the astronauts were getting into the spacecraft, it looked gloomy. There was fog everywhere. There were low clouds, and there was quite a bit of concern about the weather. But the weather officers kept insisting that the sun would come out and burn it all away before launch time, and sure enough, it looks as if it's going to do just that. From our vantage point, about 3 miles away from the launch pad, we can see the space shuttle right now. It is, however, still partially obscured by fog, and it's sort of in a silhouetted mode as we look out over the water to the launch pad complex. My colleague Spencer Allen has a very good vantage point. He's up on top of the vehicle assembly building here at the Cape. It's the highest point in the state of Florida, some 500 feet high. Spencer, what can you see from up there?
From this 500-foot level, I can just barely see the runway, 1.5 miles to the northwest. It's partially obscured now by a low-hanging bank of clouds. But as the sun continues to rise, it's starting to burn off this cloud bank, and I think we'll have a good weather conditions at the landing site for launch.
Well, Spencer, tell us, if you will, why is it important that this landing strip be clear of fog and haze when we're talking about a launch here this morning?
It's one of those safety precautions, Chris. In the unhappy event there be an early shutdown of one or more of the main engines, Discovery would have to make a pitch around, change its course almost 180 degrees, and then glide back to this landing strip, dead stick at Kennedy. A very hairy maneuver. And that's why good visibility here is needed for an emergency landing.
Okay, Spencer Allen atop the vehicle assembly building here at the Cape, and it does look as if the sun is doing its job. It looks like it's going to be a launch on time, and that event is just about 40 seconds away right now. Let's take a little listen to the launch control man
as
he tells us what's going on.
Come on, baby, go on through there. T-minus 31 seconds. We have a go for auto sequence start. Discovery's 4 redundant computers now taking over primary control of critical vehicle functions through liftoff. T-minus 15 seconds and counting. 10. We have a go for main engine start. 7, 6, 5. We have main engine start.
The main engines are started.
We have a cutoff.
The solid, they shut down.
We have an abort by the onboard computers of the orbiter Discovery.
EPD verified the big monitor after ignition and safe.
Once again, a scrub, an abort at the 4-second mark before launch. The main engines started. They ignited for a couple of seconds, and then bang, they were shut down. We don't know what's happened yet.
Shut down engine 1. OTC, we did not show engine start on route 1. OTC, CCMA, I can verify push shut down and engine 1.
A lot of technical talk here, but that can't deny the fact that the engine started up and then it stopped.
We can now verify all 3 engines have been shut down.
All engines shut down. We have red lights on engines 2 and 3 in the cockpit, not on 1. All right, CSME verify engine 1 safe for APUs down.
So we still don't know what went wrong, but more trouble for this trouble-plagued first flight of Discovery. Scrubbed yesterday because of a faulty computer, concern about the clouds and the weather and the fog this morning.
Power units, these which provide the hydraulic power to the orbiter.
And just now, as they started to ignite the engines for liftoff, just 4 seconds away, they immediately shut them down again. We hear them talking about the APUs. Those are auxiliary power units, which are used to control the steering function of the main rocket engines. They have been a source of great trouble in the past on shuttle flights. Several of them have had to be delayed or postponed because of trouble with those APUs, auxiliary power units. Let's see if we can't get some more information from Mission Control.
I think we're okay now. Okay. Everything looks good.
Shuttle project engineer Gene Thomas reporting to the NASA test director that everything looks in good shape now, that the vehicle has been put back into a safe configuration.
Of course, it was so close, so quickly that they started them up and shut them down that there was no problem. The astronauts are in no danger, and it looks like the vehicle has been safe.
Okay, copy that. ELS safe and complete. Okay, copy.
Safing by the ground launch sequencer has been completed as we continue to safe vehicle and orbiter systems.
Okay, I'll get the speed lines back on.
So right now they're busy shutting down the various other spacecraft systems, trying to determine what went wrong, and we don't know yet what this means in terms of the flight. Are they going to try again tomorrow? Do they now have to bring the vehicle back off the launch pad to the assembly building for testing or whatever? We just don't know at this point.
Go ahead. Okay, GLS safing is complete. I'd like to transition back to G9 at this time. All right, copy.
I must say that was a very spooky minute to see the main engine start to fire and then all of a sudden shut down is a scary thing indeed. They have contingency plans for almost every single phase of the flight. They can get back safely almost as soon as they clear the tower, but if something goes wrong in those first few seconds when they're just lifting off the ground before the tower, that is when they are in the absolute greatest danger of being in serious danger of being hurt or losing their lives. There's really no contingency for those first few seconds of the flight.
Display switch on.
Luckily, the solid rocket boosters had not yet been ignited. The main engines start a few seconds before the solid rocket boosters. Now, once the solid rocket boosters, which are strapped to the side of the main fuel tank, are started, there's no way to shut them off. They're like a firecracker. They just burn until they're burned out. So they would really have had trouble if they had not been able to shut down the main engines before those solid rocket boosters started. But they did, and so we have another scrub of the flight of Discovery right at the last possible second, just 4 seconds away from liftoff, and we're going to try to find out some more about what has happened here this morning. This has been a CBS News special report, the flight of Discovery, the non-flight of Discovery. I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
CBS News, this is Jackie Judd. For the second straight day, the maiden launch of the Space Shuttle Discovery has been aborted. Christopher Glenn is at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Chris, what happened?
Well, Jackie, this time it was a lot spookier than having a computer go down, as happened yesterday, which caused them to scrub. This time, we were 4 seconds away from liftoff. The main engines had been started, and all of a sudden, they shut down about 2 seconds after they had been started. Now, we understand that what happened was an onboard computer determined after the start sequence had been initiated that one of the main engines was not ready to fire, is the way that NASA is putting it at this point. So automatically those computers took over and shut the whole system down.
Was the crew in any danger?
They might have been, had it been 2 seconds later, because there's two propulsion systems on the shuttlecraft. There's the main engines, which is liquid fueled, and they have great control over those. They can shut them down. But there's also those two solid rocket boosters alongside of the main tank, and those solid rockets, those solid propellants, once they're ignited, they can't be stopped. And they would have been in deep trouble if they had indeed ignited the solid rocket boosters, but fortunately that did not happen, and they were safe.
And Chris, when is the next possible launch date?
At this point, we don't know that, Jackie, because we don't know what they're going to have to do now. They may, in fact, have to pull the shuttle and its rocket assembly back off the pad, back to the work area here at the Kennedy Space Center to do some refurbishing to see what went wrong. I think that this shutdown was serious enough so that probably some major work is indicated, at least some major testing. So it'll be sometime before we know exactly what's going to happen about a new launch date.
Christopher Glenn reporting from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I have more news in a minute.
The countdown ticked away to the very last second. Sparks and smoke were already billowing out of the shuttle's main engines, but at T-minus 4 seconds, the engine suddenly shut down. What happened is still a mystery. It is possible something went wrong in one of the shuttle systems inside the engine. The shuttle's main computer shut it down. The engines did shut down. The launch was scrubbed. Shortly after that, a small fire broke out on the pad, possibly in one of the umbilicals hooked to the big orange external tank. Sensors on the pad detected that as well, and fire extinguishers. In effect, water was just shot up toward the engines of the shuttle. This apparently is going to prompt a long delay in the launch of Discovery itself. Now, they're draining the external tank, the big orange tank strapped to the shuttle itself. They're draining it of its oxygen right now. They've confirmed there is no fire on the pad any longer. They've just gotten the go-ahead to get the crew out of the shuttle. The crew is safe. All 6 of the would-be space travelers going to crawl out once again now that their launch has been delayed. It looks as though this is going to prompt a long delay in the launch of Discovery. They may have to pull one or more of the engines off of the ship, and that would mean a delay of weeks. We've made known later on today exactly what happened. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Thank you, Doug. KTRH News time now is 8:10. Mutual News via satellite. I'm Frank Jeffrey. The Space Shuttle Discovery was 4 seconds from liftoff this morning when something went wrong, and the mission had to be halted.
Fire from the main engines. We have a cutoff. A cutoff. We have a shutdown. The engines have shut down.
An abort by the onboard computers of the orbiter Discovery.
The voices of NASA's Mark Hess and Mutual correspondent Jim Slade describing the shutdown less than 1 hour ago. Jim Slade is live with me now from the Kennedy Space Center. Jim, is there any word yet on what happened?
Not yet, Frank. The crew is out of the spacecraft. Let me tell you what I have here in terms of my notes. The crew is out and they're on their way back to their quarters. The people in the firing room are still safing the volatile systems. They're taking down pressures and getting fuel out of the steering rockets and out of the main tank. There's no telling at this point how much damage, if any, was caused. That'll come now that the crew is out and they can get close to it after detanking to take a good close look. The fault was in the number 1 engine, the one in the triangular set directly beneath the tail. It's the one, I believe, that was taken from Challenger as a substitute for Discovery's original engine.
Mutual's Jim Slade of the Kennedy Space Center. This is Mutual News.
CBS News, this is Judy Muller. It was no-go again for the Space Shuttle Discovery this morning.
This is Christopher Glenn at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. With a mighty roar, the main engine firing sequence for the shuttle was started, and then 1 second later, there was silence. One of the spacecraft's onboard computers had sensed that one of those 3 main engines was not ready to fire and shut the whole process down automatically.
Apparently, we never did get an indication that engine 1 was ready to start. Engineers here will continue to look at data and assess that problem.
Busted Launch Control described the malfunction. There was never any danger to the crew of 5 men and 1 woman, nor, NASA says, was there any damage to the spacecraft itself. The abort was the latest disappointment in a string of them in the attempt to get Discovery off the pad for its first flight. First, one of the main engines had to be swapped out when a problem was discovered, delaying the planned launch by 3 days. Yesterday, a computer failed within 10 minutes of launch, and they scrubbed. Then the washout today with only 4 seconds to lift off. What exactly happened is yet to be determined. How long it will be until another launch attempt is made depends on what went wrong and how serious a problem it is. In any case, a day of frustration and disappointment for the flight crew and for the hundreds of people on the ground who have not yet been able to get Discovery into orbit. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
2 of the 3 engines fired. One of them apparently did not, and Discovery didn't move. For a few tense seconds, it seemed that one of the engines refused to shut down. A small fire broke out on the launch pad. When it was extinguished, the hatch was unsealed and the crew crawled out. About a half an hour after they were supposed to have blasted off. At this hour, NASA is briefing the press on some theories about what might have gone wrong. Shuttle boss Thomas Utzman has this this answer for one of the main questions on everyone's mind.
As far as the next question, I know that's on everybody's mind is where do we go from here? And the answer is I think it's going to take a little while to answer that. We have people doing data analysis, and we will be getting together at 11 o'clock to analyze where they think we are and to map out where we go in the next few days.
The still mysterious failure may well prompt a long delay, possibly a postponement of weeks, and the maiden flight of Discovery. We'll keep you posted all morning long as the story develops. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
CBS News, this is Rob Armstrong. Another day of disappointment for the crew of the Space Shuttle Discovery. The latest from Christopher Glenn.
NASA officials say they don't know what the reaction of the 6 astronauts was to the abort of their scheduled flight aboard Discovery just 4 seconds before liftoff, but you could read it in their faces as they were brought out of the spacecraft. Deep disappointment. The main engines were already firing when a computer sensed something wrong and shut them off. Yesterday, a computer broke within 10 minutes of launch. Earlier still, an engine problem had forced a delay of 3 days in the scheduled launch date. Shuttle Operations Director Tom Utzman says he doesn't know how long the postponement will be this time.
It will be I feel, in the several days category. Again, the question you have to get back to is understanding the problem and then determining how much you have to do as far as rechecks on the engine before you're going to be feel comfortable.
In addition, NASA knows that this string of difficulties with Discovery is not going to sit well, either with paying customers or politicians. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
We have a go for main engine start.
Discovery's
7,
second
6,
try for a maiden
5. We have main engine start.
But a roaring fizzle.
We have a cutoff.
NTD, we have an RSLS abort.
We have an abort by the onboard computers of the...
3 engines on the shuttle were supposed to have fired. Only 2 of them worked, and for a few tenth seconds of misunderstanding, it sounded like one of the rockets was still firing. The launch was instantly aborted. A small fire broke out on the launch pad. Ground controllers considered ordering the crew to get out fast in an emergency scuttle. But the smoke and confusion cleared. The fire was extinguished, and the visibly unhappy crew crawled out about 45 minutes later. The decision to scrub today's launch was made by a computer, and that computer discovered that one of the 2 redundant systems controlling a valve on the shuttle's engines decided to shut down. Well, the shuttle still could have flown, but the computer just followed its orders. NASA's Thomas Utzman explains the space agency doesn't want the shuttle to fly with just one of those valves working.
As far as the next question, I know that's on everybody's mind, is where do we go from here? And the answer is, I think it's going to take a little while to answer that.
And the answer may be coming this afternoon. Discovery's launch will probably be delayed at least 10 days, but it could be weeks before the disappointed crew of the new space shuttle gets another chance to fly. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News. Discovery's next chance seems a long way away. NASA not only once set a launch date, it also once set a date for announcing the new launch date. Now it's not just a matter of replacing a broken part. Technicians at Cape Canaveral must pull the drug samples out of the shuttle's pharmacy lab, charge the batteries in that satellite stored in the cargo bay, and advance the film in 2 special shuttle cameras. The 500,000 pounds of fuel in Discovery's booster tank has been drained, but it'll probably be tomorrow morning before technicians can begin assessing the damage done to Discovery by a fire on the launch pad and by the high-pressure streams of water fired onto the shuttle to extinguish the blaze. The astronauts have been granted leave. 2 of them are already back home in Houston. All of them, according to Commander Hank Hartsfield, are looking forward to trying again. But right now, NASA doesn't have any idea when Discovery might try once again for a launch. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Mutual News via satellite by Mike McCluskey.
And water sprayed into it with blowdowns of fuel exhaust and the jolting starts of 2 of the 3 main engines with the presence of gases possible. Engineers will begin early Wednesday morning to pry into the machinery and make an initial assessment of just what has to be done. Officials here refuse to guess how long it'll be before Discovery is ready to make another attempt. Most of the crew members have gone home, with the exception of Spacecraft Commander Henry Hartsfield, who is expected to stay just a while longer while decisions are formed. Jim Slade, Mutual News, the Kennedy Space Center.
CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney. Barring any unforeseen difficulties, Space Shuttle Discovery should be in orbit in the morning. NASA spokesman Rocky Rod.
Everything is in excellent shape. There are virtually no constraints to launch whatsoever. Weather is cooperating for this launch. The forecast for here, the launch site, as well as all the various normal and contingency landing sites are all good. We are on time for filling the external fuel tank of the space shuttle at about 12:15 Eastern Time, and also on time for liftoff at 8:35.
NASA engineers postponed Wednesday's scheduled launch, double-checking that will control critical during the stages of flight. They're convinced now that everything's okay. During Discovery's 6-day mission, the man, one-woman crew will be with equipment and the deployment of satellites. More news in a minute.
Mutual news via satellite. I'm Mike McCluskey. Everything looks good now for a launch of Space Shuttle Discovery Thursday morning. Mutual correspondent Jim Slade filed this report from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
The one-day delay is not causing weather problems. Forecasters here say, if anything, the already good weather should be improved. The weather is a critical consideration since it affects both visibility of the shuttle during launch and the ability of the crew to see the ground if they should have to turn around for a forced landing. Additionally, there's the question of visibility not only here but at the other landing sites. Edwards Air Force Base, the alternate to Edwards, White Sands, New Mexico, and at a landing base just across the Atlantic from here in Dakar, Senegal, where the shuttle would go if it lost power in an engine on the way up. Jim Slade, Mutual News, the Kennedy Space Center.
That liftoff for Discovery's maiden flight is set for 8:35 a.m. Eastern Time. The launch will be heard live over many of these Mutual Radio Network stations.
CBS News, I'm Charles Osgood. After 3 postponements, the Space Shuttle Discovery is ready to try again for a liftoff. The launch is set for just over an hour and a half from now. Jackie Judd is at the Kennedy Space Center. Jackie, how does it look for an on-time launch this time?
This time, Charlie, things look good. The countdown is right on schedule. There is some ground fog out there, but that's expected to burn off in just a couple of hours. There are some clouds real low on the horizon, but again, weather forecasters expect it to be clear at launch time.
And no reports of any technical hitches this time?
Not this time around. Cross your fingers.
Where are the astronauts and what are they doing?
The astronauts arrived at the launch pad about 45 minutes ago. They went into this white room that is germ-free just off the orbiter. They were strapped into their equipment, and then they crawled through the narrow hatchway and are now strapped into their seats on the flight deck. 2 of the crew members are on the mid-deck. They checked out their communication systems to make sure they could hear everything that Mission Control was saying to them, and now the hatchway has been closed. The astronauts are in there. They can't get out anymore.
And what happens on this mission? Can you give us a brief thumbnail sketch of that?
Well, I'd say the first highlight is that it's going to get off the launch pad at all, given the history of Discovery. And then it's going to be a very busy mission. 3 communication satellites will be deployed. A solar panel will be tested in space. And a drug is going to be tested. There's some secrecy about that, but McDonnell Douglas, which is running the experiment, says it may eventually benefit millions of people.
Jackie Judd at the Kennedy Space Center. The shuttle Discovery counting down toward a scheduled liftoff an hour and a half from now. More news in a minute.
After 3 scrubs, the Space Shuttle Discovery is ready to fly. Geraldine Ferraro says she's getting tired of responding to financial allegations, fires burning in Montana. Good morning, this is Doug Poling with the CBS World News Roundup. The Space Shuttle Discovery is said to be ready to fly. After 3 scrubs, we're told the shuttle now has the right stuff to get up there and do its job. Launch time is supposed to be just a little over a half hour from now, 8:35 a.m. Eastern Time. Jackie Judd is at the Kennedy Space Center.
Countdown is moving ahead toward an on-time liftoff for the 3 times delayed maiden voyage of Discovery. Within the hour, technicians discovered a program error in a console in the on-ground firing room. That's not expected to give controllers any serious problem. The console could be shut down and the engineer moved to another spot. The day here has dawned bright and clear with only a few wispy clouds overhead. The 6-member crew is inside the orbiter. This is the 3rd time they've been strapped into their seats. Astronaut Norm Thagard, who flew in an earlier shuttle, says Discovery's problem shouldn't be a factor in today's flight.
All of the crew members have had a lot of training at this point, and they're all professionals. They certainly have rehearsed what they're going to do many times, and the fact that they're now going to do it in a somewhat later or delayed fashion won't change the way they perform.
At liftoff, Discovery will head off toward the east and within 45 minutes be in the first of 96 scheduled orbits. Later today, the first big maneuver, a communication satellite, one of 3 in Discovery, will be deployed. For now, Discovery, the 3rd in the fleet of shuttles, is on Launch Pad 39A, and in about 30 minutes, its debut flight will begin. Jackie Judd, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
The president had hoped to call the shuttle astronauts and watch them put 2 commercial satellites in orbit from the cargo bay, but the delay in the launch of Discovery forced a few changes in his plans. Still, Mr. Reagan will tour 2 exhibits of commercial technology developed as a result of the space program, including a heart pacemaker and a high-tech system for injecting medication. The president also will speak to NASA employees about what he's called the endless potential of space, and he's expected to point to a series of initiatives he unveiled last month to help promote private investment in space as a signal that his administration is looking to the future. It's a theme that was noticeably absent at last week's convention, when the president used his acceptance speech more as a forum for a partisan attack than as a canvas on which to paint his vision for America. His aides have designed today's appearance and another next week in Chicago to try to make up for what they see as an opportunity missed. Deborah Potter, CBS News, the White House.
This mission will last 6 days, 59 minutes. It will end in California, the desert at Edwards Air Force Base.
T-minus 38. Repositioning orbiter vent doors coming up on a go from the ground computers to start the onboard ground. T-minus 31 seconds. We have a go for auto sequence start.
Discovery becomes self-sufficient at this point. Ground support systems leave it. Just about 20 seconds now to liftoff.
20 seconds and counting.
Let's listen now to the final countdown.
T-minus 15. T-minus 11. 10. We have a go for main engine start. 6. We have main engine start. 3, 2, 1. We have SRB ignition, and we have liftoff. Liftoff of mission 41D, the first flight of the
Discovery bolts from the launch pad. It has just cleared the tower, leaving behind foamy clouds of white smoke being trailed by a huge stream of flames from its main engines. Going straight up toward a clear blue sky. The building I'm in now, some 2 miles away, is being shaken by the force of ignition. Going straight up. A beautiful sight. The papers on my desk are being shaken by the vibration of this blast.
First 84%, then to 65%. Throttling down confirmed. 45 seconds.
Throttling down means they're decelerating just a bit.
Altitude 3.5 nautical miles, downrange.
Discovery's beginning to pitch. That's to put it on the right track, to get it on the right orbit. The astronauts are now flying heads down.
Passing through the period of maximum aerodynamic pressure. Engines running at 65%.
Discovery already
2,400 feet per
has
second.
reached Mach 1, the speed of sound. In just about a minute, the first big maneuver of the launch, the separation of the solid rocket boosters. They will be dropped off into the ocean and then retrieved. At 46 minutes into the mission, Discovery will be in its first orbit.
Discovery, roger, go at throttle up.
Go at throttle up. That means they're stepping on the gas. They're accelerating now.
3,400 feet per second, altitude 13 nautical miles, downrange distance 8 nautical miles.
What's left now here at the Kennedy Space Center are huge white foamy clouds. That's the only sign now that we can see that Discovery took off successfully at last. Discovery is off. The spaceship will circle Earth 96 times before coming home, landing at Edwards in California, just at the start of her 97th orbit next Wednesday. For now, a picture-perfect beginning to Discovery's first mission in space, with continuing coverage of the flight of Discovery. I'm Jackie Judd, CBS News, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
CBS News, I'm Charles Osgood.
We have main engine start. 3, 2, 1. We have SRB ignition, and we have liftoff. Liftoff of mission 41D, the first flight of the orbiter Discovery, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
Just over 20 minutes ago, the Space Shuttle Discovery blasted off from Cape Canaveral on a 6-day mission in space.
A successful launch after 3 previous efforts had ended in failure. Jackie Judd reports from the Kennedy Space Center.
The launch was pretty as a picture. In a split second after liftoff, Discovery cleared the tower and streaked upward toward a cloudless blue sky, being trailed by a thick stream of fire from the main engines. In moments, the shuttle arched over to put it on track for its first orbit, and the astronauts were flying heads down. Within 8 minutes after launch, the first 2 critical events occurred successfully. The 2 pencil-shaped solid rocket boosters fell into the ocean. Then a few minutes later, the external tank dropped into the Indian Ocean. Discovery is now flying on its own and will be in orbit 183 miles above Earth in another 30 minutes. This will be a busy mission. Later this afternoon, the first of 3 communication satellites is to be deployed. Jackie Judd, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
Launch was delayed. There was a problem with a console at the Kennedy Space Center, but finally it happened.
We have SRB ignition and we have liftoff. Liftoff of mission 41D, the first flight of the orbiter Discovery, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
Cheers erupted in the Kennedy Launch Control Center as America's third space shuttle rode a plume of fire and smoke into the clear Florida sky. A few minutes from now, the crew will fire up the shuttle's 3 big orbital maneuvering engines to kick Discovery into an orbit 160 miles high. Later today comes the first big test of this flight, the launching of a satellite using the same kind of booster that fouled up twice earlier this year, sending 2 satellites into worthless orbits. So we'll find out later today whether the booster problems with those satellites have been licked. We'll also find out a few things about the decision to fly a teacher in space, because that is one of the subjects that Wayne Delfino will be discussing on the Talk of Houston later this morning here on KTRH. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News Radio 740.
CBS News, this is Judy Muller. It's up and away for the Space Shuttle Discovery at last. This is Jackie Judd at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Discovery is just completing its first orbit, about 184 miles above Earth. The liftoff from the Kennedy Space Center appeared flawless this third time out. The shuttle leaped from the launch pad and streaked eastward against a clear blue sky. Within an hour, Discovery's orbital maneuvering system had fired twice. That placed the shuttle in the proper orbit, and it got a thumbs up from the crew and mission control.
Discovery, roger, reach right clear, John. We had a good almost 2 on time. Roger, that's great news, Mike.
Discovery is carrying more cargo than any other shuttle, including 3 communication satellites. The first one is to be deployed this afternoon. Other mission objectives: extending a 10-story high wing outside of Discovery to test solar energy in space. And there's a drug processing facility on board which will be used to purify a hormone that could one day be used to fight disease. But 1 hour into this maiden flight, the word from the launch crew is, what a day. Jackie Judd, CBS News, the Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
CBS News next at 10 o'clock. CBS News, this is Doug Poling. The Space Shuttle Discovery is in orbit around the Earth after this morning's successful launch. Still, the first stage of the mission has not been without some problems. Jackie Judd reports.
Commander Henry Hartsfield, who has been at Discovery's controls twice before, says it was a long grind to get this shuttle off the ground. But Discovery's performance during this successful attempt at liftoff is described by shuttle managers as flawless. The ground support system did not work quite so well. 3 computer problems stymied troubleshooters right up to the last minutes. But in the end, they didn't interfere with launch. Launch Director Robert Seek.
The only way you get over the disappointment of a scrub and an abort, as we had 2 previous, is to follow that with a successful launch. And that's certainly what we had. It looks like we've delivered a 100% performing vehicle into orbit, and we hope to follow with a safe and successful mission.
The shuttle is now in its second orbit, and in several hours, a paying customer will know whether its investment was worthwhile. A communication satellite owned by Satellite Business Systems is to be deployed. Jackie Judd, CBS News, the Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
From ABC News, I'm Bob Walker. It took a couple of months and 3 separate delays, but on the 4th try, the shuttle Discovery was launched this morning. The mission going perfectly so far. The launch, however, was delayed for 7 minutes, but as the head of shuttle operations, Tom Huntsman, put it,
it wasn't the smoothest launch count we've ever had, But again, we're very happy that it ended successfully and that we were able to launch after a short delay.
The 7-minute launch delay was necessary because a pair of small airplanes was in the restricted airspace nearby. One of 3 satellites on board Discovery is to be launched this afternoon. NASA's receiving $34 million for launching those satellites. The weather was so clear at the Kennedy Space Center this morning that the white trail of smoke during the launch was seen in Tampa, 130 miles to the west. President Reagan, happy over the launch, helicoptered over to NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland this morning and had some words of praise.
It has proven wrong those dreary souls who lack the vision to support your efforts. With their pessimism, America could never have gotten off the ground. And with your space shuttle, we have again and again.
And the president said the space workers had inspired all Americans, from children in school to people like himself, who are approaching, in Mr. Reagan's words, the outer limits of middle age. I'll have more after...
CBS News, I'm Richard C. Hartelet. Discovery, with 2 last-minute cancellations and a 24-hour delay blotting its record, had a final cliffhanger this morning. A private plane came too close to the safety zone around the spaceport, and the launch was delayed for 7 minutes while Air Force fighters shooed it away. Right now, the crew is happily in orbit, getting ready for its first job, deploying a communications satellite a few hours from now.
From ABC News, I'm Roger Skibinis. Start this morning, the Space Shuttle Discovery is racing through the heavens. About a half hour from now, it will launch one of 3 satellites aboard. President Reagan traveled to the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland today to praise the men and women of the nation's space program.
We have it within our power to create a bounty of new jobs, technologies, and medical breakthroughs surpassing anything we've ever dreamed before or imagined.
The president never mentioned Walter Mondale by name, but there was no question of his reference when he said he favored high tech instead of high taxes.
CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards. The Space Shuttle Discovery continues in a flawless orbit after finally embarking on its maiden voyage today. Discovery, with a crew of 6 and the biggest shuttle payload so far, blasted off 10 seconds before 8:42 a.m. Eastern Time after being held on the ground for almost 7 minutes because a private plane flew into its flight path. For an update on Discovery's progress, a report from Spencer Allen at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Discovery has deployed the first of 3 communication satellites carried in the cargo bay. The spinning SBS-4, the Satellite Business System space vehicle, was popped out by loaded springs and is now trailing the orbiter by about 15 miles. Here's how the deployment was described by the crew.
Okay, as you can see, we had a good deploy. Right on time. I've got the current attitude and rates if you're ready to copy.
Now will come the critical burn of the PAM, the Payload Assistance Module, which will loft the SBS into an elliptical orbit, eventually settling into a 22,300-mile high circular path. The PAM's 84-second burn comes automatically, 45 minutes after deployment. Although the PAM has operated successfully 18 straight times, the last 2 were failures and left 2 expensive satellites drifting in useless orbits. This critical, all-important burn will come about 25 minutes after the hour. Spencer Allen for CBS News, Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
CBS News, I'm Dallas Townsend. The Space Shuttle Discovery has passed the first major test of its mission. About an hour and a half ago, it successfully deployed the first of 3 communications satellites, and a short while later, the satellite's rocket stage, known as PAM, for Payload Assist Module, fired right on the button.
You'll be glad to know more good news. We just had a very good nominal perigee kick motor burn. Okay, deck control, good news. We're up here celebrating.
As for the satellite, Mission Control points out its commercial value.
It will go into service to provide 5 transponders to Satellite Business Systems for their Skyline telephone service, another 5 transponders to the Satellite Television Corporation for one of the first direct broadcast system efforts in orbit.
Now this message.
15.
For a
a few tense minutes, it looks like this flight might have been delayed again. First, there was a problem with the console on the ground. Then at least two private planes straight into the shuttle's airspace. But 7 minutes late, it finally happened.
We have SRB ignition, and we have liftoff. Liftoff of mission 41D, the first flight of the orbiter Discovery, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
The payload bay was exposed to the void of space a short time later, revealing the 3 satellites to be launched on this flight. The first was kicked out of the shuttle this afternoon using the same troublesome booster that earlier this year hurtled 2 other satellites into worthless orbits. So the 5 men and 1 woman flying aboard Discovery were no doubt relieved to hear this bit of news.
You'll be glad to know more good news. We just had a very good nominal perigee kick motor burn.
Okay, Dick, that's real good news. We're up here celebrating.
A minor problem has cropped up in the shuttle's experimental drug lab, but mission controllers are confident it can be fixed before private citizen Charles Walker begins mixing his mystery drugs tomorrow morning. Also coming up tomorrow, the CENTCOM satellite set to spin out of the shuttle, something much on the minds of the space travelers as they said goodnight to mission control.
Sure, it's been a good day for us, and we're looking forward to tomorrow's CENTCOM deploy.
The crew now sleeping, resting after a hard day's work, spending the first night in space aboard the Discovery now that it's finally in orbit. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News Radio 740.
Mutual News via satellite. I'm Mike McCluskey. The crew aboard Space Shuttle Discovery has turned in for the night. Thursday, they made what they hoped to be a very good launch of a communication satellite, though it'll be a few days before it's known if the final orbit's all right.
Teachers probably for Mondale. Day 2 for the shuttle Discovery with some important work left to be done. Good morning, this is Doug Poling with the CBS World News Roundup. That's what woke up the 6 Discovery astronauts this morning on their second day in space. Later this morning, the shuttle crew will try to launch a second communication satellite. They launched one yesterday with no problems. The time is 2 minutes after the hour.
For the 6 astronauts, they get a 3:30 a.m. wake-up call consisting of a medley of military music, and then it was right to work. A big task for the crew happens about 1 hour from now. That's the launch of the CENTCOM
Thanks. She's some wonderful
Rudy says and the satellite's battery pack will apparently not delay the CENTCOM's launch.
We have seen the CENTCOM Battery 2 pack 3 temperature higher than anticipated. We are willing to raise the upper limit from 84 to 90 degrees.
Preparations for the satellite deployment are now underway. Live from the Johnson Space Center, Sue Davis, KTRH News Radio 740.
CBS News, I'm Charles Osgood. Space Shuttle Discovery is awake after its first night in space and preparing for a high-stakes outer space game of Frisbee. Sue Davis of Houston affiliate KTRH reports.
In a few minutes, the crew will launch the CENTCOM-4 satellite. This is the second of the 3 satellites Discovery will launch on this flight, but the first to use the so-called Frisbee launch method, which involves literally slinging it from the shuttle as opposed to the spinning launch of other satellites. One minor problem has occurred with the temperature in one of the satellite's battery packs. It's higher than expected, but unless the temperature increases a great deal, the satellite will be deployed. Also on tap for the crew today is the activation of an experiment involving a mystery drug. McDonnell Douglas is studying the commercial feasibility of using processing in space to manufacture drugs. Just what this one would do has not been revealed by the firm. Sue Davis for CBS News at the Johnson Space Center.
From ABC News, I'm Kate Jordan. Astronauts on the shuttle Discovery deployed a communications satellite for the Navy, the second of 3 satellite deployments set for this mission. Astronauts' day began with a rousing medley of military music to wake them up. The
The major task of the day was the launching of the CENTCOM-4 satellite. A possible problem was discovered while the astronauts slept.
We have seen the CENTCOM Battery 2 pack 3 temperature higher than anticipated.
But the temperature never rose above 86 degrees, and when the time came, CENTCOM-4 went off without a hitch.
Stacom's deployed, Houston. Roger that. Good news.
The new launch method was called the Frisbee system because the satellite was tossed out of the shuttle.
Yes, it proves physics of Frisbees works up here as well as it does on the ground.
After that came work on the drug experiment commissioned by McDonnell Douglas. We don't know what drug is being manufactured, but it's widely rumored to be a treatment for diabetes. The experiment being performed by McDonnell Douglas engineer Charles Walker after replacing some hardware this morning.
On with the completion of SEP prep at this point.
And if you were outdoors in Houston about 8 o'clock this morning, you got a greeting from space.
We're looking out the window trying to see Houston. Some people outside of Building 1 waving at you now. Do you see them?
We're waving back, John.
More major work tomorrow, the third satellite deployment, and the first major test of the solar wing that NASA hopes will be able to convert the sun's energy into electric power on future flights. Live from the Johnson Space Center, Sue Davis, KTRH News.
CBS News, I'm Dallas Townsend. Discovery deployed a second communications satellite today, and the operation went as well as the first one did yesterday. This one is a CENTCOM satellite radio relay station, and it was pushed into orbit spinning like a giant Frisbee. In fact, as astronaut Richard Mullane noted, it proves that the physics of Frisbees works up here as well as it does on the ground. A third communications satellite will be deployed tomorrow.
Has been shut down for the night as ground controllers here in Houston try to solve a problem that's threatened one of the main goals of the shuttle's maiden mission. KTRH reporter Doug Miller has a live report from the Johnson Space Center.
The key to making drugs aboard the shuttle is the difficult task of separating biological materials in the weightlessness of space. That biological material must pass through a solution and an electrical field before the stuff will separate. Now, the material now to keep that material flowing through the solution and that field, it has to be pressurized, in effect squirted through the drug lab by pumps. Now, the problem is the pressure of this flowing material has been varying, so the stuff has not been separating like it's supposed to. And that's why the drug lab has been shut down overnight. It's supposed to buy time for ground technicians to figure out what's gone wrong. This is a problem that could have wide-ranging effects, since the makers of this mystery drug, McDonnell Douglas, claim that it might be a treatment for a medical problem affecting millions here on Earth. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News Radio 740.
CBS News, this is Paul Lockwood. Space Shuttle Discovery, and will be for another 5 hours or so. Tomorrow, the shuttle crew will launch the third of 3 communication satellites. Number 2 was released successfully today. Onboard machine intended to make a secret hormone. However, officials say it can be fixed in flight and should present no lasting problem.
Shuttle Discovery has prompted the crew to shut down the shuttle's specially designed drug lab, and tonight ground technicians here in Houston are trying to solve the problem that threatens one of the main goals of the shuttle's maiden flight. KTRH reporter Doug Miller has details in this live update from the Johnson Space Center.
A hormone that might someday become part of a new drug was supposed to be flowing through the shuttle's pharmacy lab tonight. A biological material was supposed to be squirting through a special solution and a field of electricity. But this evening, that biological material was squirting with too much pressure. So Shuttle Drug Lab engineer Charles Walker turned the lab off.
I got like the guys in the back room to think about this. Obviously, we're going to shut down for this evening and start over tomorrow morning.
McDonnell Douglas made the pharmacy lab. Susan Flowers is a company spokesperson who says no one is sure what went wrong.
We're not certain yet. Our mission support crew will be working through the night to try to analyze the
coming on a day marked by another success, the launch of another satellite from the shuttle's cargo bay. The CENTCOM-4 satellite was flipped out of the shuttle with a spin. NASA calls this new technique the Frisbee method.
Crew's physics of Frisbees works up here as well as it does on the ground.
Tomorrow comes the launch of a third satellite, and for the first time, the shuttle will stretch a 10-story tower out of its cargo bay. A tower that may someday bear the solar cells powering an American space station.
Okay, it was a good day, and looking for another good day tomorrow. We're looking to make it 3 for 3.
The third shuttle satellite launch is set for 8:17 Houston time tomorrow morning. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News Radio 740.
7:40 a.m. CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney. The Space Shuttle astronauts are up and at 'em. Mission Control gave Discovery's crew a wake-up call a little over an hour ago. The major job of this third day in space is the deployment of the Telstar 3 communications satellite. Astronauts Steve Hawley and Richard Mullane have already put 2 other satellites in space with complete success both times. Crew member Judy Resnick has another job today. She's to start checking out Discovery's collapsible solar panel, a thin sheet that unfurls to stand 10 stories above the shuttle's cargo bay. The job for NASA engineers is to figure out what went wrong with the biological processor, the mini drug factory that operated for 9 hours yesterday, then mysteriously shut down. More news in a minute.
Our wake at the shuttle crew goes for a hat trick. A tearful ceremony in Korea marks a tragic anniversary and partial success in Montana. I'm Deborah Potter reporting on the CBS World News Roundup. The crew of the Space Shuttle Discovery will try to make it 3 for 3 this morning, putting their third satellite in orbit in as many days. If they're successful, they could go a long way toward restoring confidence in the trouble-plagued shuttle's reliability. More from Sue Davis of CBS affiliate KTRH at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
The early morning wake-up call for the astronauts this morning was Telstar, appropriate because the first major job for the Discovery crew this morning will be the launching of the shuttle's third satellite, the Telstar 3. When in orbit, Telstar will provide communication services for AT&T. Also on tap for today, the first attempt at unfurling the solar wing. What begins as a 4-inch thick package will become a 10-story high device that NASA hopes will be able to change solar energy into electricity in future flights. The crew carried over one problem from yesterday. It occurred in the drug lab, where fluctuating pressure forced cancellation of the drug experiment last night. Experts on the ground spent the night trying to work out a solution to the problem, the first major difficulty encountered on what has been a very successful flight for the Discovery. Sue Davis for CBS News at the Johnson Space Center.
From ABC News, I'm John Grimes. If the crew of the Space Shuttle Discovery were hockey players, they'd have the hat trick right now. Within the hour, the shuttle crew opened the cargo bay, delivered their third space satellite, Telstar 3.
Telstar is now deployed. Deploy, Houston. Roger that. Congratulations. 3 for 3.
It'll still be about a half hour before NASA knows for sure if Telstar 3 did get into its proper orbit. More after this. WOAI.
CBS News, I'm Neil Strasser. For the Space Shuttle Discovery, it's a perfect 3 for 3.
We've had the successful deployment of the Telstar satellite, a third successful deployment of the mission, and all the satellites are now gone from the orbiter's cargo bay.
Happily, Mission Control reported the AT&T Telstar communication satellite had been sent spinning out of the space shuttle. And just as happily, about 45 minutes later, it reported the firing of the satellite's rocket motor, sending it off toward orbit.
Radar has confirmed the separation of the payload assist module from the Telstar spacecraft. Every indication is that it performed normally, and the Telstar is on its way to the transfer orbit.
NASA needed this morning's third success to help rebuild the shuttle's reputation as a satellite launcher, because a European consortium has now also entered the commercial satellite launching field. CBS News continues in a moment.
I'm Clarissa Douglas. The crew of the Space Shuttle Discovery successfully completed the day's tasks and has called it a night, especially to capsule communicator Dick Richards.
Good night, Dick. Good night, Dick. Good night, Dick. Good night, Dick.
Good night, Richard.
Good night, Miss Calabash, wherever you are.
The third and final satellite of Discovery's payload was sent into orbit today, much to Mission Control's satisfaction.
Discovery, concerning today's events, congratulations, you're 3 for 3 with Telstar, and as you saw, as we did, it was a good perigee burn.
Okay, we copy all that, and we were also very pleased the way the oath went, and also the fact that we're 3 for 3 on satellite deploys.
The astronauts also unfurled a solar sail 10 stories tall from the shuttle's cargo bay, then lowered it and raised it again. The sail is the forerunner of a device being developed to convert sunlight into electricity to power space stations. President Reagan gave his congratulations to the shuttle crew shortly after he broadcast his weekly paid political address. It was an encouraging message to the American people, with the president promising he would not rest until his administration brings a job to the home of every American. With the fall campaigns set to start on Monday, Democratic presidential contender Walter Mondale received a briefing from National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane and accepted political courtesy from the incumbent president.
Mutual News via satellite. I'm Dave Chester. Saturday aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery will continue experiments Sunday using a huge solar sail for collecting the sun's power, a device which could be used on the future space station. Saturday, the crew successfully launched the third and last of their communication satellites. Says
Space Shuttle mission has begun for the crew of 6 on board Discovery. They were awakened a little less than 2 hours ago. Included on today's schedule is another test of the 73-foot solar panel, which astronaut Judy Resnick successfully extended on 2 occasions yesterday.
TRH, Houston. CBS News, this is Rob Armstrong. The next Discovery and its 6-person crew midway through their mission, and everything is going well. A glitch that delayed a secret medical experiment Friday has now been fixed. 3 communication satellites have been launched successfully, and the solar sail, a 10-story collapsible panel, will be put up and taken down a few more times today. A repeat of yesterday's experiment successfully engineered by mission specialist Judy Resnick.
CBS News, this is Mitchell Krause. Marred today by a buildup of ice, which blocked the lines that dump excess water and waste overboard. Mission Control has ordered the 5-man, 1-woman crew not to use the onboard toilet, but instead to use what are called Apollo bags, a system employed on early space flights that didn't have inside plumbing. Unless further problems develop, the shuttle will remain in orbit until Wednesday. CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney. There, but NASA is already looking forward to the next space shuttle flight just 4 weeks away. On October 1st, Shuttle Challenger is scheduled to carry a record 7-member crew into orbit for 8 days of experiments and maneuvers that will include a U.S. female astronaut's first spacewalk. Aboard Discovery, the astronauts are faced with a housekeeping problem. The crew has been ordered to stop using the toilet and switch to the old plastic bag system because ice is clogging the lines used to eject wastewater. Monday, NASA says the crew may try to chip away at the ice with the shuttle's robot arm. The problem could put off further tests of the solar sail, which was successfully deployed for a second time Sunday. Labor Day doings kick off the presidential campaign, a chilling problem for the space shuttle Discovery. Good morning, this is Christopher Glenn with the CBS World News Roundup. Is not just an earthbound annoyance, it's plaguing the orbiting space shuttle Discovery as well. Sue Davis of Houston station KTRH has the latest.
A small but significant problem for the shuttle astronauts this morning. An ice ball has formed on a wastewater dump valve. It has not prevented the crew members using the onboard toilet, but there is concern that if the ice remains, it could damage the shuttle's tiles on re-entry. This morning, the astronauts tried shaking the ice loose by firing some of the shuttle's jets.
It's a pretty good shake, John. We're complete and back and run. Okay, thanks a lot. Hopefully that did something for us. Hope so.
But that hope was futile. The ice remains. Under consideration now, knocking the ice off with the robot arm or even putting one of the astronauts outside to try to remove it. The problem is not being called critical at this time, but NASA officials definitely want that ice off before the Discovery returns to Earth. Sue Davis for CBS News at the Johnson Space Center.
Crew plans more experiments with the 10-story tall solar power sail today. They came awake this morning to music from the Broadway of the 60s.
Give me a head with hair, long beautiful hair, shining, gleaming, steaming, flaxen, waxen. Give me down to bare hair, shoulder length or longer. Here, baby, there, mama, everywhere, daddy, daddy, yeah.
Good morning, Discovery.
Good morning, John, and I can't help it.
The music, a tribute to the way the long locks of mission specialist Judith Resnick flow in zero-G and her response to it. Soviet officials are thinking about space in terms of weapons talks today.
This is David Andelman in Moscow. How close the link is in the Soviet mind between the outer space weapons talks in Vienna and the stalled START and SALT missile talks in Geneva is still somewhat ambiguous. What is clear this morning after a briefing by a senior Soviet Foreign Ministry official, Vladimir MECO, is that there is such a link, as explained through his interpreter.
Outer space, it can advance and push forward also the solution of many problems, including the strategic arm.
Saturday, Soviet President Chernenko first raised the prospect of such a link in an interview with the Communist Party daily Pravda, saying an agreement on space weapons, quote, would facilitate the solution of questions of limiting and reducing other strategic arms, unquote. How firm such a link is remains unclear, some observers believing that today's statements may reflect more the hard-line views of Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko than any real consensus of the ruling Politburo. David Andelman, CBS News, Moscow.
CBS News, this is Mitchell Krauss. No Discovery tried and failed today to dislodge two icicle-like chunks of ice that are blocking the wastewater exhaust pipes of their craft. The ice is preventing the crew from using the onboard toilets and forcing them to use plastic bags instead. Today's maneuver, which involved rapid bursts of rocket firing in an attempt to dislodge the ice, could be repeated, although it now appears that a remote-controlled arm outside the orbiting ship will be tried. CBS News, this is Mitchell Krauss. There's been no trouble.
CBS News, I'm Dallas Townsend. NASA experts are considering a spacewalk, officially known as extravehicular activity, or EVA, in hopes of ridding the Space Shuttle Discovery of ice blocking the shuttle's outside waste nozzle. Mission Control described the situation.
We have been told that the crewmen, Steve Hawley and Mike Mullane, have put on their launch entry helmets and have begun breathing the pure oxygen as preparation for a pre-breathe, doing the pre-breathe activity for a potential contingency EVA tomorrow. That is one of the options being considered among several to break loose the large chunk of ice on the port side of the orbiter. Other options include the use of the mechanical arm to bump the ice off, doing additional higher pressure water supply dumps, the use of the large primary RCS jet thrusters to shake the vehicle, or the OMS engines to also shake the vehicle.
NASA also says there'll be no danger to this mission. Officials are concerned that damage to the tiles could hurt the next shuttle mission. Now this message.
CBS News, I'm Carol Pozetsky. NASA officials concerned about chunks of ice stuck to the side of the shuttle Discovery had considered an astronaut spacewalk tomorrow to remove them. Apparently, plans have changed. Moments ago, Dick Richards of Mission Control informed the Discovery crew that it would stay put, at least for a day.
Sorry to bother you. We just got official word we will not be doing an EVA tomorrow. We'll be considering a lot of other options. We'd like to query you one more time before you go to sleep tonight on whether or not you'd like to extend the sleep period tomorrow.
We prefer to get up on time.
That's Flight Commander Henry Hartsfield responding to Mission Control. Space officials stress that the ice poses no danger to the astronauts.
There is concern, however, that it could break off during the return to Earth and damage the shuttle's tail section. There's still the possibility of a spacewalk Wednesday, with the mission extended a day and landing on Thursday. More news right after this.
Mutual News via satellite. I'm Mike Gillespie. NASA officials are studying the situation overnight, and Tuesday they'll try something else to get a large piece of ice off the outside of Space Shuttle Discovery. Mutual correspondent Jim Slade has more.
In the morning, they'll pressurize the lines that go into the holding tank where the waste material from the toilet is collected. They'll pressurize those lines, forcing oxygen into them, and they will heat the holding tank, the contents of it, hoping that this will add some pressure and some heat from the inside to help the thing come loose when the thrusters are fired.
Officials don't want to try a spacewalk to get rid of the ice unless nothing else works. Mutual.
Breaking the ice aboard the Shuttle Discovery. Campaign 84 tours the West. The Canadian campaign is over. It's Election Day. Good morning, everyone. This is Christopher Glenn, sitting in for Reed Collins this week with the CBS World News Roundup. For the longest time, it was a case of every which way but loose concerning a chunk of ice clogging the waste disposal valve of the orbiting Space Shuttle Discovery. For 2 days, the crew had tried a variety of methods to dislodge the ice without success until the word finally was passed from Commander Henry Hartsfield to Sally Ride on the ground in Houston.
The procedure was successful.
Good job, Hank.
A smaller chunk of ice remains, but should be no problem for tomorrow's scheduled landing in California. We asked Morton Dean at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida for details on today's success.
They used that shuttle robot arm to reach around and literally took a swipe at the big chunk of ice and knocked it free. So it was a successful maneuver after failing earlier when the ship's engines were lighted up to try to shake the ice free.
The arm maneuver was kind of dangerous since they couldn't exactly see what they were doing from inside the ship. Is that right?
It required some very detailed precision work, and it worked just perfectly.
Is the problem completely resolved at this point?
Well, NASA has told the crew to put the arm away and seems satisfied that that small chunk of ice will not cause any damage to the ship if it were to fly loose during re-entry. So that small chunk of ice will remain unless somehow they can melt it before they get back home tomorrow morning.
The crew, of course, has been without toilet facilities on board since the problem cropped up over the weekend. Is that resolved now?
Well, they've had limited use of the sanitary facilities, and there is no word yet as to whether they can resume making full use of the indoor plumbing on the Discovery.
Basically, everything looks good for landing in California tomorrow.
From everything we've heard this morning, everything looks good for a landing in California tomorrow, and NASA does not seem to be overly concerned that a small chunk of ice remains over one of the exterior nozzles that carries water from the spaceship.
Correspondent Morton Dean.
Discovery is scheduled to return from its 6-day mission tomorrow, and the crew won't have to worry about the potential danger posed by ice hanging from the side of the spacecraft. The astronauts were able to knock most of the ice off with a nudge from Discovery's mechanical arm. Astronauts today successfully maneuvered a giant robot arm to knock off a 15-inch icicle clinging to the spacecraft. There's been fear the ice might damage the shuttle during tomorrow's scheduled re-entry.
CBS News, this is Paul Lockwood. 4 states, Florida, Nevada, Georgia, and Alabama, on their final sleep period of the Space Shuttle mission. They're scheduled to land tomorrow morning at Edwards Air Force Base in California. More on the flight of Discovery now from the Johnson Space Center in Houston and Doug Miller of station KTRH.
Now all that's left is the bumpy ride back to Earth. Despite a string of petty problems, Discovery's crew has accomplished all of the flight's major goals. The icicle that stubbornly stuck to the side of the shuttle has been knocked away by the ship's mechanical arm. Flight Director John Cox says that except for that frozen blob of wastewater dumped off of the shuttle, Discovery's first flight has been a big success.
We're extremely pleased with the vehicle performance.
We know that we have to go back and look some more about ice and the dumping procedures.
One final first lies ahead for Discovery. Its first landing. The weather forecast is good for a touchdown at Edwards Air Force Base in California at 9:37 Eastern Time tomorrow morning. Doug Miller for CBS News, the Johnson Space Center.
A couple of days ago, they heard from the president. Today, the 6-member crew of Discovery chatted with the vice president and his wife.
We're really proud of you, and I just wanted to have this opportunity when I'm back in my own hometown here to say hello and congratulate all of you.
Congratulations were indeed in order. The once seemingly jinxed maiden voyage of Discovery had accomplished all of its major goals. Sure, there were problems with Discovery's drug lab, but 83% of the mystery pharmacy sample was finished, producing plenty of the stuff for clinical testing. And sure, that icicle on the side of the shuttle had given NASA the shivers, but Commander Hank Hartsfield this morning used the robot arm to knock the ice away, earning a nickname from Mission Control.
The ground crew passes on a special thanks to the Ice Busters 41D.
Ironically, the crew that had trouble with ice crystals outside the ship had trouble with a student experiment producing crystals inside the shuttle. But like almost all other problems with Discovery, it was fixed and the test went on. In fact, if it weren't for the not-so-big chill over the frozen glob of wastewater dumped out of the shuttle, Flight Director John Cox indicates that the mission would have been almost letter perfect.
We're extremely pleased with the vehicle performance. We know that we have to go back and look some more about ice and the dumping procedures.
One problem's developed tonight on the shuttle. Well, it's not developed, it's one that's continuing. They're still afraid to dump wastewater out of Discovery for fear it'll freeze up and make another ice ball. So they can't flush the water out from their toilet, and that's why Mission Control has put the commode off limits to all but 1 or 2 of the crew. You can guess who can use it. Tonight, the weather forecast is looking fine for a landing at Edwards Air Force Base in California at 8:37 Houston time tomorrow morning. The landing to be carried live here on KTRH. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News Radio 740.
CBS News, I'm Christopher Glenn. The initial orbital voyage of the Space Shuttle Discovery is nearly over. The 6-person crew is buttoning up the ship in preparation for a California landing later this morning.
This is Jackie Judd at Edwards Air Force Base, California. Discovery will orbit Earth about 2.5 more times before touching down on the dry desert lake bed just after sunrise. Everything is on schedule, although the crew was awakened earlier than expected when a leak was detected in 2 of Discovery's oxygen tanks. However, flight controllers say the leak is so small that enough oxygen is available for 2 more days in space. Within the past hour, the crew sealed the orbiter shut by closing the payload bay doors. The next big maneuver is the 2.5-minute firing of Discovery's engines to slow the shuttle's speed and prepare for re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. The weather here is expected to be good by touchdown. A cloud is now hanging over the lake bed, but that's expected to dissipate. 2,500 spectators already have arrived at the base for a bird's-eye view of Discovery's return. Jackie Judd, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
Half hours now, the half-dozen Discovery crew members will return to Earth at Edwards Air Force Base. The astronauts have been up since about 11 last night, making last-minute preparations and stowing away all the gear and equipment, and they're now strapped into their harnesses.
The Guidance Navigation Control Officer has affirmed that Discovery is now at the burn attitude, which means it is essentially flying backwards and upside down.
There was another minor problem for the Discovery crew this morning, a leak in an oxygen tank. The astronauts were woken up early to switch to other tanks, and the leak now presents no problem. It has been stopped. The runways at Edwards have been pronounced in good condition, and it is expected that the cloud cover there will burn off before the shuttle's arrival. KTRH will provide live coverage of the Discovery's return at about 8:35 this morning. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Sue Davis, KTRH News Radio 740.
7:40 a.m.
KTRH News Time, 7 o'clock.
Shuttle Discovery is coming home. A conservative landslide in Canada's elections. Compromise is seen near in Israel's political crisis. Good morning. This is Christopher Glenn with the CBS World News Roundup. All the gear is stowed, the hatches are battened down, and the new Space Shuttle Discovery is ready to return from a week-long shakedown cruise in orbit. Jackie Judd, site in California.
Discovery is just about an hour and a half from touchdown and is approaching the final critical sequence of re-entry. Soon, Commander Henry Hartsfield will fire the shuttle's engines to slow down Discovery's tremendous speed. Then the orbiter shoots through the atmosphere, reaching temperatures as high as 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit. That's always a suspenseful time for mission control because of the communications blackout. So far, though, everything is on schedule. Discovery's payload bay doors closed without a hitch, and the shuttle is now flying upside down to align itself for re-entry. There was some nervousness when a leak was discovered in two of Discovery's oxygen tanks. The crew was awakened earlier than expected to be told, but then controllers decided the slow leak was not a critical problem. The shuttle will touch down on the vast expanse of the Mojave Desert. Runway 17 actually is a dry lake bed that allows for a wide margin of error. Safety trucks already are in position at the landing site. Even before its return, Discovery's first time out has been called a success by NASA. Jackie Judd, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
1.5 minutes past the hour.
The Discovery crew has been awake for several hours now, making the final preparations for landing at Edwards Air Force Base in California. That'll be about 8:37 Houston time. The crew has been strapped in their harnesses for about an hour now, and moments ago, the crew received the word for re-entry.
Discovery Houston, you are go for the deorbit burn.
Roger, John, go for burn.
The weather at the Edwards Air Force Base is reported to be good right now, with visibility at about 100 miles. KTRH, of course, will provide live coverage of the return of the shuttle Discovery beginning at 8:35 this morning. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Sue Davis, KTRH News Radio 740.
CBS News, I'm Charles Osgood. In about half an hour, if all goes well, the Space Shuttle Discovery will glide through the California skies and come in for a landing.
This is Jackie in California.
We had a good burn on time. Roger, that's great news, Hank. Thanks a lot.
The successful deorbit burn following engine firing has slowed Discovery and jolted it out of orbit. The spacecraft is no longer flying upside down. Now it's nose first and angled up. That's so the tremendous heat generated during atmospheric re-entry hits the shuttle's bottom, which is covered with insulation. In just a few minutes, Discovery should begin its re-entry when temperatures can reach 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a communications blackout during that period, which always provides mission control with some tense moments. Here in the Mojave Desert, the sun is just coming up. The weather is expected to be ideal for landing about 35 minutes from now. Jackie Judd, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California. Following the hack, the head-in alignment circle. That's a big imaginary circle that Discovery traces to put it in perfect alignment for touchdown. Beginning to make that big circle now, heading over toward the town of Boron. The site here in the middle of the Mojave Desert is glorious. The sun is just coming up, a big ball of orange on the far ridge. A happy sight for this crew of 6 that has been orbiting the Earth. This is their 97th orbit, just a couple of moments now from touchdown on runway 17. Actually, runway 17 is a dry lake bed in the middle of the desert. There's a lot of room, a lot of margin of error here should there be any mistake.
NASA T-38 being piloted by Charlie Justice from Aircraft Operations in Houston. Rendezvousing with the orbiter. Got T-38 carrying an IMAX camera.
That's the voice of Mission Controls, John Lawrence in Houston.
30 feet per second. Range 10 miles. Mach 0.5 velocity. 16,000 feet altitude. Touchdown in roughly a minute and a half. The flight control system still in the auto mode. And making a perfect left turn right around the heading alignment circle. 8 miles from the end of the runway.
Coming around the hack now, just 8 miles from the runway.
15,000 feet altitude.
Coming down fast now, still traveling at a very fast speed. Their angle of attack is a lot steeper than what you would find in a commercial jet. Just before touchdown, in fact, it's about 7 times as steep as a commercial jet would come into an airport. Here it comes, dropping fast now. Being trailed by a chase plane.
6 miles to the end of the runway, about 30 seconds from touchdown. Altitude 7,000 feet. Sync rate a little under 250.
Houston, you look good on final.
Thank you, John.
Getting a thumbs up from Mission Control, just what they wanted to hear, just seconds away now. And it's in sight.
Feet, 4 miles from the end of the runway.
More than just a little white speck out there on the horizon now.
Range 3 miles.
Being trailed by that tiny little chase plane.
Altitude 2,000 feet. Range 12,000 feet.
Here it comes. A few seconds, the landing gear is down.
Down. Altitude 300 feet.
Dropping slowly. Here she comes.
300 feet from the end of the runway.
Couple more seconds. Dust is coming up. Wheels down.
Gear down.
Discovery is home. Now the nose is beginning to drop. Front wheels are down.
Securely down.
Leaving a big trail of this dry desert dust behind it.
Time of 6 days, 56 minutes, 4 seconds. Nose gear down at 6 days, 56 minutes, 16 seconds.
Coasting fast now along this runway, still going at about a couple hundred miles per hour. Final rollout. Heading out toward the end of the runway, and at the end of that runway is a convoy of trucks and ambulances just in case they're needed. To recap, Discovery and its 6-member crew are home after 6 days and about 1 hour in space. The spaceship returned safe and sound from its first voyage. NASA is already calling the mission a success. The flight of Discovery. I'm Jackie Judd, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
NASA is calling a very, very good mission. Traffic this morning in the final...